Reluctant Preppers provides educational awareness and commentary only. Opinions expressed do not constitute personalized financial advice. Viewers are encouraged to do their own research and seek qualified personal financial consultation before making investment decisions. Hey, Reluctant Preppers, if you haven't heard, we've already started our monthly 1-ounce U.S. Silver Eagle thank you gift to one active Patreon subscriber each month, signed by your host, Dunnigan Kaiser. And you don't want to miss out on that.
Please help us grow by subscribing today at patreon.com/reluctantpreppers.
Does your family ever get exasperated with you for stockpiling such things as paper towels, bottled water, or toilet tissue? Well, they certainly can't object to you stockpiling money. Silver, the only money recognized by the U.S. Constitution. And your first 10-ounce purchase of pure silver can be had at spot price with no premium by going to sdbullion.com/RP. And when you buy it that way, you'll be supporting Reluctant Preppers as well by going to sdbullion.com/RP. Thanks.
As a responsible person with growing concerns for your privacy and personal liberty, you want to know where we're headed and what you can do about it. We ask the experts what you need to do to take prudent and responsible action to safeguard your family's wealth and well-being, and what basic first steps will help you to be aware and prepared. ReluctantPreppers.com.
Welcome back, Reluctant Preppers. We have a returning guest tonight whom you are sure to recognize. Rob Kirby, proprietary analyst of the gold, silver, and other financial markets, is here with us again on Reluctant Preppers to answer your questions about what is going on in the greater picture and how it's going to affect each of us individually. Rob, thanks for joining us again here on Reluctant Preppers.
Pleasure to be with you again, Dunnigan.
I want to make sure and remember, as I sometimes forget, to mention that this is Monday, November 12th, 2018, for all of our viewers keeping track at home. And we had you on about a little over a month ago, and at that time you were talking about a bearish sentiment that you could just feel in the tone of the markets, of the major media, the way the stories, the narrative, everything was going was just giving you this very bearish feeling. And it just so happened that I rushed and got that story published the very night that we had that discussion. And for the next week, the Dow dropped over 1,200 points, and it's been rough seas ever since. And just circling back with you to get another gut check with you and see what your sentiment meter is reading here a month later after that pronouncement.
I have trouble being constructive on the equity markets, and I remain the same sentiment towards the fixed income arena as well. I think we're in for some really, really tough sledding between now and the end of the year, and I'll preface that by saying I truly hope I'm wrong, but I don't have a good feeling about the equity markets or the bond market really going forward.
And some people have mentioned that the equity markets are no longer true markets. We've talked about that for some years now, but they're basically products of and symptoms of a propped up system where the powers that be keep bringing in unreasonable amounts of bond buying to save the markets or put pressure on the dollar in order to save the markets, that kind of thing. And do you think that even with all those ulterior influences, those unnatural forces, that you think that something, it just seems like it's in the brewing to upset the house of cards?
Yeah, well, yes is the answer to that question, Dunnigan. But I want to explain to you the reason why. Over the past number of interviews that we've done, one of the truly underlying threads that has gone through all of our interviews has been the notion that the rest of the world is becoming very fed up with American management of the global reserve currency, namely the dollar. And this has been, in recent interviews, this has been highlighted by the revelations that, over at least $21 trillion in off-book money, or money that isn't even acknowledged to officially exist, has flown through the books of at least two government agencies, namely Department of Defense and Housing and Urban Development, or HUD. And foreigners, this has heightened foreigners' distrust or disenchantment of American stewardship of the world's reserve currency. And I just wanted to throw a couple more logs on the fire, because this is being evidenced continually. In the most recent couple of weeks, we've seen, and one of them, I think, in the last 3 days, Saudi Aramco doing a deal privately with a private Chinese interest to supply 130,000 barrels of oil a day, which succeeded just a little bit more recent deal to do 170,000 barrels a day. So Saudi Aramco in the last month or so has committed to doing 300,000 barrels of oil per day with private Chinese interests. Now, what I can tell you is that in these articles, which of course never get published in the Western press, you've got to go to the Russian press to even find out that these things have happened. That should be your first clue that there's something untoward going on. And the second clue is they don't mention what currency these trades are transacting in. And I'll bet you a roll of quarters that these deals are being done in Chinese yuan and not the dollar. And just remember, everybody, it is the Saudi guarantee in a secretive deal done with Kissinger back in the early 1970s that was the underpinning of the US dollar, the petrodollar, as the world's reserve currency.
Right.
Further to that, just yesterday, it was announced that Japan and Russia were going to be conducting joint naval exercises in the Gulf of Aden, which is Middle Eastern waters. And just remember, everybody, that Russia and Japan haven't even signed a formal peace agreement at the conclusion of the Second World War. So it's rather extraordinary that you'd see Japan and Russia doing joint naval exercises in Middle Eastern waters. And anyway, I reference these because, to me, these things stand as further powers that be globalist isolation, as in isolation from the rest of the world from the I'm just going to come out and say it. It's American stewardship of the world's reserve currency. People are fed up with it. The global community is fed up with it. And I mean, listen, isn't it interesting that we've seen just in the last week the activities surrounding the most recent midterm elections? Like, what a fiasco. I mean, all you need to do is turn on any mainstream media outlet, and we've got voting irregularities and problems with counting the vote in Florida again. Mm-hmm. This seems to be a recurring theme every time America goes to vote. Is the rest of the world to believe that America can't manage an election? And if you can't manage an election, can you be expected to manage the world's reserve currency? Anyway, all I'm saying, these are further demonstrations of why the world is turning away from the dollar as the world's reserve currency. Because what's being exhibited to the rest of the world is, countless or time and time again examples of fraud, examples of buffoonery. It's sad to watch. Frankly, I grew up as a person believing that the sun shined from dark places with regards to, in a very positive light, America. And I'll tell you, watching what I've been seeing occur in recent times has made me very, very sad and very despondent that America and what America's historically has stood for has just seemed to have been reduced to nothingness. It's brutal, and it's sad to see. So,
and the phenomena you're describing are at the sovereign fiat level and that sort of thing, the mismanagement of that. But also, I would echo the last sentiment that you talked about the fallen state of the U.S. in the world's eyes, as far as exercising any kind of civil or moral leadership. We've seen just such uncivility. We've talked about this in a couple of our interviews. The uncivility and hostility towards those of opposing opinions is now just official policy, and the ability to even have a reasoned debate in the public square is diminished to the point where it just seems that just sort of rancor and sort of pitting one party against another is being fomented, and it really makes you wonder: is this the end of American thought leadership?
Not again. Listen, I'm 58. And I mean, my formative years were really the 70s and the 80s, and I grew up believing that America not only occupied the moral high ground, I believe that America owned and built the moral high ground. Mm-hmm. Now I truly, when I back up and take a broad look, now I wonder if American leadership even knows where the moral high ground is. Mm-hmm. And they certainly don't occupy it anymore. And it saddens me to say that. Yep. It saddens me deeply to say that.
Yep. I think there's a lot of people in the U.S. who feel the great pain of the loss of that expectation on their fellow, on the society around them. That it feels like it's people are afraid of even speaking openly or putting up yard signs for the candidate that they support, or talking in public about things, or talking at their employer for sure about what they believe, afraid of reprisals. And that seems like a real loss of. And another example like that is that we interviewed a county sheriff who's the head of a national association of sheriffs, and talking about constitutional basis for the sort of the grassroots foundation of law enforcement within the U.S. about 4 years ago. And it got 150 thumbs up and 0 thumbs down. When I republished it just a few months back, it was a very mixed review. Same content, but the spirit of the times have changed dramatically.
Yeah. Well, you know what, Donegan, and another one of our constant subjects that we speak of in our interviews. Usually, we get around to the precious metals. And for how many years have we been talking about the manipulation and the rigging of the precious metals markets? And just please answer this question: How many shills have we heard in the mainstream over the years, even that we've been doing interviews? Have we heard shills? And you know what? I don't even have to name them, but I mean there are certain ones that get lots of face time on CNBC. In Canada, on BNN, Bloomberg, who claim that the notion that there's rigging in the precious metals markets is conspiracy theory, is ridiculous. They equate people that make such claims with boatloads of evidence. They equate them to people who believe in UFOs and belittle and deride them. And what was it in the past week? We've had a senior trader at J.P. Morgan, come clean and admit that he was rigging the gold market, the silver market, the platinum market, the palladium market. Had been doing so for 6 or 7 years, from 2009 through 2015. Had been taught to do so by his superiors, and claims that the senior management of the bank had full knowledge that this was occurring. And I mean, where is the mainstream in inviting these shills who have countered and claimed and shilled for the establishment, saying that this has not been occurring for years and years and years? Why aren't they getting their perp walk of shame? What's wrong with the media? What's wrong with the truth? Can nobody handle the truth? This is another really, really sad thing. and only sad because, at least in my case, I've known how very true it's been for so very long. And to listen to people shilling and claiming that the accusations of rigging in the markets were all baseless, when the mountains of evidence were ignored or pushed aside, it's truly and utterly disgusting. And frankly, it makes me ashamed. And when I say it makes me ashamed because I came from an institutional background. And, in some ways, I almost feel like I was a part of it. I used to work in that realm. And the filth and the corruption and the dirt that was going on underneath my nose, Dunnigan, that I couldn't see because I had my nose pressed up against the butt of an elephant, and I couldn't see it because I was too close to it. Anyway, I did wake up, and I've been awake for quite a long time now, and but I still shake my head in disbelief that so many others just can't bring themselves to accept reality.
So many of the common people, that's I get to stand here in this role as everyman and get to ask these questions of experts like yourself. But I think so many common people, they have to go on the basis of what's available out there because we don't have firsthand knowledge. But when we talk to people like yourself who have been in the precious metals brokerage industries, when you talk to Bill Murphy of GATA.org, the Gold Antitrust Action Committee, and those who work with him, and they say that they track this, day after day, month after month, and they see all these examples of unnatural market activity that have these same determined ends, and then they see the blind eye turned by regulators and get told themselves by reporters who were supposed to interview them, oh, actually we've been told we can't talk to you. That it really does have a smell to it for sure.
Yeah, and just to finish on that thought, the smell that it really has to it, and to make this point really clear, regulators are well aware that the markets are rigged. Regulators are also well aware that the entity doing the rigging is the U.S. government itself. And that's the reason why regulators refuse to out the perpetrator, because the perpetrator is the government. It is the people that have commandeered the U.S. Treasury and the U.S. currency. The operators of the world's reserve currency have commandeered our capital markets. And they have, and the reason they rigged the markets, Dunnigan, is because the dollar, it's because the actual design of the dollar as an irredeemable fiat currency with compound interest, by its very design, has a lifespan. And its lifespan is past its due date. And technically, the dollar should have been dead a number of years ago, quite a number of years ago. And the only reason it hasn't died its natural death is because extraordinary measures, covert, dirty, criminal measures have been taken to create trillions upon tens of trillions of off-book dollars. And they've hoodwinked the world by siloing these dollars in dark entities like the Exchange Stabilization Fund, where these dollars are marshaled or coordinated in a coordinated fashion, where they're brought out of their dark silo to buy bonds at government auctions when U.S. participation doesn't show up. And they also use this money to buy when foreigners want to sell crazy amounts of bonds and there are no takers. I find it interesting because something that I've been prattling on for at least 3 years is with foreign appetite for U.S. government debt securities reducing, and foreigners liquidating U.S. government securities, with this occurring, while U.S. government continues to grow their deficit, both fiscal and budgetary deficits, greater each year. I mean, I've been asking it for a minimum of 3, maybe it's more like 5 years. Who's buying the bonds? Who's buying the debt that foreigners are clearly rejecting? And this mountain of U.S. government debt continues to grow. I'm going to say almost at a geometrical pace now. And nobody, well, now it seems to me, almost every interview I hear anyone do, people are saying, who's buying the debt? Who's buying the bonds? I mean, it's a common question. People are saying, and mistakenly and foolishly, a lot of people think it's the Fed. And they'll say, well, it must be the Fed and they must be monetizing the debt, but the Fed is reducing their balance sheet.
So they say.
And the Fed probably is reducing their balance sheet. Just like I do believe the Fed stopped QE about 3 or 4 years ago. But understand, the U.S. Treasury and the Fed are two different entities. And the Exchange Stabilization Fund is a part of the Treasury. And it's the Exchange Stabilization Fund, it's the U.S. government itself that is monetizing its own debt. It is not the Federal Reserve. You know why? The Federal Reserve's too smart. The central bankers are not going to make a losing bet. They'll let the U.S. Treasury do that themselves, and it is the U.S. Treasury that's doing it, and that's why the regulatory apparatus refuses to report on it or out them, because ultimately the government's never going to out itself. The other big thing, which a lot of people seem to have lost count of, even in the alternative press, people confuse, at least in my view, people confuse the operational basis of the Fed versus the Exchange Stabilization Fund, and good reason for the ESF to be engaged in this dark, this dark propping up of the capital markets to aid the dollar, is that the ESF actually has a mandate to do that. The Federal Reserve, their mandate is more geared towards inflation and employment. The other thing, the ESF is subject to no oversight, meaning they don't answer to anyone. The Federal Reserve, on the other hand, is required to go before lawmakers twice a year and give testimony under oath. So plausibly, the Federal Reserve or the Federal Reserve's chairman or the head people at the Fed, they have plausible deniability in terms of being the direct perpetrators of these activities, while on the same hand, the Fed, they're not lily white, because the Fed is the sole exclusive broker for the Exchange Stabilization Fund. So anytime the ESF is acting in the markets, they do so through the Federal Reserve's New York Fed trading desk. So they're completely aware and cognizant of what the U.S. Treasury is doing. But I mean, it's not the Fed acting in their name. It's the Fed brokering business of the U.S. Treasury, namely the Exchange Stabilization Fund. That they serve as the interface. And I mean, I only say that because I acted for many years as a broker in the interbank market.
Right.
And because I put one bank into a trade that they lost a lot of money on, wasn't my fault, because I was an agent. I wasn't a principal, and I wasn't allowed to have positions as a broker. So I put two principles together, and with these interferences in our capital markets by the Exchange Stabilization Fund, the Fed serves the same function that I did. They are a broker. They are an agent. They are not the it's not their capital that's at risk. It's the Treasury's fraudulently created capital that's at risk, and this fraudulently created off-book money undoubtedly had to have been created with the knowledge and assistance of the Fed. So the Fed is intertwined with it. But you see, what it really comes down to in these situations of state fraud and let's just say illicit activities at the highest levels, often it's the nuance that allow people to skate away from a perceived infidelity. I could cite Bill Clinton for saying that he didn't have sexual relationships with that woman because he didn't describe blowjobs as having intimate sex. So I see what I'm pointing out, and I'm not trying to get dirty here, but what I'm trying to say, they bring this hokomo into the argument, saying that well, I don't view my activity as being bad because I wrap myself in the flag. I said I was doing it for reasons of national interest. I don't define sex the same way as you. I don't define nefarious activity in the capital markets the same way as you. If the Exchange Stabilization Fund is engaged in this activity, it's okay because they're not subject to any law, and it's right in their mandate. I mean, so this is the kind of nuanced crap that we find ourselves dealing with, and I mean, it's like when $21 trillion is reported as being missing, the White House immediately orders an investigation and an audit of the Department of Defense, the Pentagon, and what did we find in August of this year? Well, they declared that the U.S. budget is now a matter of national security, and therefore the U.S. budget is basically now all redacted, which basically means because of national security, the U.S. government now doesn't have accounting. And that's what it amounts to. Your federal government is no longer, by edict, because they wrapped themselves in the flag, and they said it was a matter of national interest and national security, they are no longer subject to accounting. I mean, you know what, Dunnigan? I wish we could all be have no longer to deal with accounting. I mean, because that means we could get rid of the IRS. And maybe that's a good idea.
Sounds a lot like what Ron Paul was saying when I went to the Ron Paul Institute Peace and Prosperity Conference in Washington, D.C., and he was saying a lot of what you're just saying about the government being able to justify just about any overstep, non-constitutional, illegal. It makes no difference as long as you claim patriotism as the background, wrap yourself in the flag.
Yeah, sure. And so and I mean, it really becomes a game of, it becomes ridiculous very quickly, it's because you're into esoteric arguments or debates about what national security is, what is rigging, if the government rigs, it's not rigging. Because the government isn't subject to any law, they're not subject to accounting. Accounting is something for little people like you and I. And clearly they and we know that they have laws on the books where publicly traded companies can be granted waivers where they don't have to report accurately for public consumption. They're entitled to keep two sets of books. They can lie, they can say whatever they want. These laws are on the books in your country right now. So I mean, when does this become a tyranny? Because the question about is this sex or not, or is this rigging or not, we in the same breath you can ask, is this become a tyrannical situation or not? And are we living under a tyranny or not?
Yeah, we just had Dr. Edwin Vieira on last week talking about the proper role of government as a created institution by the people constitutionally, and with strictly limited powers and reach, and reminding us that we, the people, are actually the governors of the government, and that when you start to see this, this litany of usurpations or whatever, it really does raise that question. I think that gets back to circle right back to the very beginning when you talked about something has fundamentally changed in the tenor and in the spirit of the times in our country. If people are falling out of belief in real markets, and they're falling out of belief in that they can trust their leaders and they can trust the media and so on, elections, etc. What you're describing now is one more thing. It's that they have any of the original powers that they're supposed to have as the people, the actual creators of the country. So,
yeah, and all of this, plays back to my original comment. This is why I have trouble having a lot or being constructive on anything in the equity realm or the fixed income realm, because I frankly view both of these big picture areas as being frauds, and even though they've admittedly behaved in nominal terms, have behaved horribly, I continue to like precious metals. As long as you're holding physical precious metals, and as long as you haven't used your grocery money to buy physical precious metals, which means you might have to liquidate them at an inopportune time.
Right.
Precious metals, physical precious metals, don't owe anyone anything. You buy an equity, you buy Apple, if you buy Tesla, you are putting faith in a management team. You're putting faith in you're putting faith in the popularity of the products that they create. You're taking a lot of risk that you may not even really have considered or understand. And if any of those conditions, or if any of those variables change in a negative way, these things can lose their footing very quickly. Physical precious metal doesn't have a manager. Physical precious metal doesn't have anyone it owes money to. Physical precious metal is inert. Physical precious metal has served as money for the past, as long as we've had recorded history. Physical precious metal has been money for the past 6,000 years. Even though we have fiat currencies that people pay taxes in and people transact with every day in modern times, doesn't mean that physical metal isn't money. Every central bank in the world carries physical precious metal on their balance sheets as a tier 1 asset. That makes it money. Okay? So it is money, it remains money, and as far as I'm concerned, it will always be money. So, I want to own some real money. I will always want to own some real money. And that's why I beat that drum. Because everything I see around me tells me that everything else that people hold dear is being discredited in front of our eyes at an alarmingly increasing rate.
And while everybody can point to the Dow Jones average, still hovering near all-time highs, and that sort of thing, you can say that's not the point. The point is that eventually all this factual discrediting that's happening will eventually be accepted by even I don't know what the tipping point is going to be, but at some point, and you were mentioning earlier this litany of transactions for oil that are being done outside of the petrodollar system, and these other countries that are transacting directly with each other, and you've mentioned that over the past several months. At what point is it a percentage of global GDP, or is it a number of transactions, or is it a mind share? What is it when you finally reach that tipping point where people go, okay, forget it, we're going to break the lie?
And that's a great question, and that's the question. That's the question that most people really, really, really want to know. Most people really, really, really want to know the day it all changes. And but here's the thing. I look at it more as a backdrop. I know what I grew up with. What I grew up with was the dollar was supreme, and all oil transacted in U.S. dollars, and America occupied and owned the moral high ground, and now we fast forward to today, and what do I see? Well, the dollar is no longer supreme. Major powers in the world are doing business outside of the dollar. We've got former enemies and countries forming alliances and doing cooperative work that even 5 years ago would have been unthinkable. That's just referencing Japan and Russia doing joint naval exercises in the Middle East. And, Saudi Arabia, who's been, historically in the petrodollar era anyway, who has been the staunchest, backbone of dollar supremacy and dollar hegemony in the world, selling oil to China, and it's like, and they're not saying what currency they're doing the business in. Well, to me, the only reason why they wouldn't be saying, if they were doing it in dollars, they would have said they were doing it in dollars. And that means to me that they are doing some business now in yuan. And that makes me also wonder, like, when does Saudi Arabia pull the plug? I don't know. And it's like, I'm not saying I like Saudi Arabia. I mean, they've got big issues themselves. It's the world is not the same as it was 5 or 10 years ago. And the pace of change that I'm recognizing and witnessing is that the pace of change is quickening. And with the pace of change quickening, it tells me that we probably reach some sort of a climatic event at, let's just say, relatively sooner than later. Mm-hmm. And it's sort of like living in California. It's like living in California and not having fire insurance on your house. You might dodge a bullet for a few years, and maybe it was like this year, I guess it's Malibu that's been vacated or evacuated.
Yeah.
But I mean, last year it was somewhere else. The year before it was somewhere else. But the recurring theme is that fires keep coming to California. So the question is, you can see it. You can see that it's encroaching. You can see that it's coming. You can see and you can hear about other people in your state that are encountering this issue and problem, but it hasn't struck you yet. So therefore, it's like, well, I don't need fire insurance because I'm immune to it, and it can't happen here. Well, you know what? It can. It really can, and that's the big takeaway, is it can happen. And, time is of the essence where it could happen any day.
True.
Just because your house isn't burning today doesn't mean that, later on this month or next year or the year after you're going to get it. But anyway, usually it makes sense to have some fire insurance if you're going to live in a place that's got, a high proclivity to have, wildfires.
I wanted to turn, if we could, to some of the viewers' questions that have been submitted for me to pose to you. We've only got maybe 15 minutes left maximum. First one, I think you've already touched on this multiple times. Stuart Ogilvie says, thank you. Where do you see gold and silver between now and the end of the year?
I think they're going higher. Like, I know they've been beaten down, but my view remains that these are great things to own and hold. And I mean, if gold goes down $50, I'm not selling my gold. If silver goes down $1 or $2 or $3, I'm not selling my silver. I'd be more inclined to buy more.
Mm-hmm.
So, gold and silver will have their time, and when it does, it will be breathtakingly so, I believe.
Busy Mountain asks, can you tell us how many experts in your field you communicate with about your conclusions on the economy and what the markets will do? And if so, who are they?
I share thought with an awful lot of people. Many of them would be common names to a lot of people that would be listening. I don't know whether it really does anyone any good that I spit out a bunch of names, but there's a group of, I'm going to say, I don't know, there's actually more than one group. There's probably 2 or 3 groups with maybe anywhere from 6 or 7 up to 12 people in loops, and that are on common threads, and we sort of have daisy chains of emails that get sent between a number of groups,
mm-hmm.
and we share thought, and we banter back and forth, and we're not always in agreement, and that's another reason why I don't really want to attach names,
sure,
specific names, but we're not always in agreement, and and that's good. But that just means that there's really is a market somewhere.
Yeah. There's one market that's not fake. Mac asks, and you mentioned a couple of these themes here, but the actual impact. How does the $21 trillion affect the price of gold?
Well, how has it affected, or how should it affect? Let's just separate those two. What it should have done, the revelations of
right.
this dark money should have sent the nominal price of gold skyrocketing.
Right, by dilution. Yep.
But and the reality is, the revelation that the 21 trillion is exists and it's being hidden. Did send people in to buy gold and silver as they know gold and silver, which is namely futures contracts. But what all you really saw was an increase in open interest on COMEX. So you see, the what we have for price discovery for precious metals is a fraudulent organization in New York called the COMEX. And the buying and selling that occurs there, nobody can tell the difference between a paper ounce and a physical ounce, because on the COMEX exchange, a physical ounce and a paper ounce are treated the same way. And the amount of paper ounces that get sold far exceeds the true supply of physical metal. And that can only happen and persist and occur when you have regulators that look the other way. And the reason regulators look the other way is they know it's official U.S. Treasury policy to sell the metals down and keep them arbitrarily capped at a lower price level. Because if the price of metal rises dramatically, it shows that the dollar isn't strong, and it undermines confidence in the dollar. So it's a failing grade on the report card for the dollar. So that's why it's not allowed. But if one thinks about it, that kind of activity is not sustainable long term or forever, and that artificial capping will be defeated when there's no more physical metal to honor the fake paper price. And that will occur. I can't tell you when, but it's like living in California. saying that you have a high likelihood of your house catching fire and burning down to nothing. Well, tell me when my house is going to catch fire.
Yeah.
No, but I'll sell you a fire insurance policy instead.
Eddie Jones asks, can you map out what steps holders of precious metals should take immediately following a financial collapse? Everyone always says, hold precious metals, but very few comment on how to manage them in a crisis.
Well, my attitude towards holding precious metal is try to keep it in relatively small denominations, because the comments that I've heard, for instance, over the years about gold versus silver. $1 million worth of gold fits in the glove box of a small car. $1 million worth of silver might disable a pickup truck. Mm-hmm. Because of the weight. And so people say to me in the past, have said to me, I'd really like to own silver, Kirby, but silver's really, really, really heavy. And then I usually like to say to them, well, how heavy will silver be when it's $600 an ounce? Mm-hmm. And you get funny looks when you ask that question. $600 silver won't be heavy. Mm-hmm. But it might be very impractical to have kilo bars.
Okay.
The day silver is at $600 an ounce, because nobody will be able to make change.
Yeah.
Therefore, I'm talking about managing your precious metals holding.
Yep.
I prefer to own smaller denominations if possible, but I'm always conscious about how much of a premium I have to pay to get smaller denominations. So, but in any case, I would suggest, owning smaller denominations. And how do you manage? I mean, most people who transact in physical precious metal do so through coin shops. So, I truly believe we will live in a time, most of us anyway, we will live in a time when coin shops will be the banks, and the banks will be shuttered.
It's a related question. A number of viewers are asking this similar question: is in the case of a crisis, if everyone wants to go redeem their precious metals, which have now inflated in value, will the coin shops have any currency to redeem them into, or what people will actually be able to do to try? Maybe the thought process has to change. Instead of the coin shops, it's making direct purchases with other people who have something of value that you need to purchase.
Well, you see, the real issue that most people don't understand, at least in my view, is that a 1 ounce silver eagle or a 1 ounce gold eagle is more fungible than a $100 U.S. bill. So so the thinking's really backwards, because a lot of people think that the 1 ounce metal coin is harder to transact with than paper money. But the reality is, you go to there's a lot of countries in the world, if you go with a $100 US $100 bill in American currency, like Canada, for instance, most stores, I live in Toronto, most stores in Toronto will take a $20 American bill, but they won't take $100. Because if it's counterfeit, they don't want to be stuffed with a $100 loss. They'll take a 20, they'll take a 10. But you can't, it's hard to spend $100 American bills in Toronto. You can go to the bank and exchange them for smaller denominations or for Canadian currency. But all I'm saying is, and I'm pointing out, the actual reality is the paper money is harder to transact than the physical metal. I can take a silver eagle or a gold eagle. I can go to any country in Africa. I can go to any country in Eastern Europe, and I'll get cash on the barrel at spot for that coin anywhere in local currency. So you see, what has occurred in the Western world is our media, as directed by our financial masters, have instilled in us the belief that physical precious metal is too cumbersome, is too difficult to transact with, is unacceptable, is unaccepted, and is bad news. And the reality is, it's completely opposite. It's their fallaciously created fiat money that's actually the hardest thing to transact with globally. And the easiest thing to transact with globally is physical precious metal. And it's always been that way. And I'm really confident that it always will be that way. So, a lot of people are making these assessments and are making these comments out of sheer ignorance. That's all I can say, because that's reality.
Next question really got me thinking. Todd Shreve asks, what gives the government the right to tax profits on gold? They obviously couldn't do it when there was a gold standard, and the rise of the gold price is actually just a devaluing of the dollar. It made me think that the taxing of capital gains, whether it's a house or anything, stocks or anything, if in the as you mentioned earlier, the policy of devaluing the dollar from its inception always is going to drive up the apparent price of things in nominal terms, and isn't that just another stealth tax, a way of just taxing things that shouldn't even be taxed, because they could be sitting still as the dollar devaluates, therefore they can be claimed to be increasing in nominal value, therefore your capital gains tax are due?
Well, I'm going to answer that question by saying, what really gives the government the right to do anything they do? What gives the government the right to expropriate land? What gives the government the right to be engaged in fraudulent elections? What gives the government the right to impose an income tax on people when it's in defiance of the Constitution? What gives the government the right to engage in civil asset forfeiture? What gives the government the right to do a host of things the government does? Nothing gives them the right. They do it. They do it because they can, and because they can get away, or they have gotten away with it. Mm-hmm. And the only thing that stops them from doing things that are unjust and not in accordance with the laws of the land is when people stand up and when people say no mas.
We've got one from Ukraze who says, currently in Venezuela, the gold to silver price ratio in bolivars is very close to the price ratio in dollar terms. I was expecting the price ratio to close the gap in a hyperinflation scenario. That's also quite thought-provoking, because we've been told that in a hyperinflationary scenario, we'd expect silver to far outperform gold, but it sounds like in Venezuela, they've held pace as far as the gold-silver price ratio.
And, not so much. The gold-silver ratio in Weimar, Germany exploded to the upside as well. And the reason that I did some work on this some years ago, and what I came down to was the rationale for that was that where you might expect the ratio to close, instead it widens, and the reason is there's flight risk. If you think you might be in a position where you're going to have to leave the country in a hurry, you're not going to be able to drag 2 tons of gold with you in a truck as easy as you can put a gold bar in the glove box of your compact car. So that's why I would literally say it's the mobility factor. But I mean, if nobody has any reason to leave where they are, like let's just say if hyperinflation was a global phenomenon, and people felt that they were not going to be any better off being in location A than location B or C, and everyone stays put, then I would expect that ratio would close. Anyway, I truly believe that the gold-silver ratio is ridiculous where it is. For every ounce of gold that comes out of the Earth's crust, roughly 8 ounces of silver comes out of the Earth's crust. And that tells me that nature would imply the gold-silver ratio should be somewhere around 8 to 10 to 1. Instead, it's 85 to 1. And to me, that is spitting in Mother Nature's face. And I don't think that's a sustainable or a wise thing to do long term.
Well, Rob, we've asked you a lot of questions, and you've been very forthcoming with your answers. Is there anything as a final thought that you wanted to leave with our viewers before we have to let you go?
Yeah, I'd say, if you're insured, continue to remain insured. If you're not insured, think about getting some insurance. And in that I'm saying physical gold or metal. And I would avoid paper representations of gold and silver, which means that GLD and SLV are not, in my view, ownership of metal. And buying or selling COMEX futures is not buying or selling real metal either.
There was one last question I forgot to ask you, and that was from Bill W. This was entered earlier, but I failed to ask this last time. Rob, what mechanism or action will ultimately override the metal's price suppression?
It's physical demand. End of story. Physical demand. A certain amount of physical metal must be sold into the market to justify the fallacious paper price. And there will come a point where the system will not even have the small amount of physical that's required to put in the market to justify all the paper ounces that are sold. Because there will come a point where the people that hold the last marginal ounces of physical in the system will realize that it's a complete losing hand, and they'll fold. And then they will become buyers themselves. You see, all these people that have sold metal down in the paper markets, there will come a day when they will buy. They will be the biggest buyers of physical metal. And that will happen. I can't tell you what day, but that inevitably will happen. So the short answer to the question is, this ends when physical demand trumps paper selling.
We have been talking with Rob Kirby, proprietary metals and markets analyst, here with again on Reluctant Preppers. Rob, thank you as always for joining us.
My pleasure, Dunnigan.
Does your family ever get exasperated with you for stockpiling such things as paper towels, bottled water, or toilet tissue? Well, they certainly can't object to you stockpiling money, silver, the only money recognized by the U.S. Constitution. And your first 10-ounce purchase of pure silver can be had at spot price with no premium by going to sdbullion.com/RP. And when you buy it that way, you'll be supporting Reluctant Preppers as well by going to sdbullion.com/RP. Thanks.